When two campus guards told a black veteran to leave his daughter's graduation, they thought it would be simple. What they didn't expect was that 7 special forces, soldiers would rise from the crowd and change the meaning of respect in that room forever. No, one in the crowd knew that morning would end up in headlines or in people's hearts. It began quietly, with the hum of traffic over the small town of Brookhaven, Texas, the air heavy with heat and hope. Marcus Lee, a 49-year-old Marine Corps veteran, drove his silver Chevy Tahoe past the front gates of Brookhaven High. The parking lot was already overflowing. He had left before dawn, driving nearly 10 hours from Mississippi, his uniform pressed so sharp it looked new. But it wasn't new. Every stripe, every ribbon carried years of sand, sweat, and silence. He parked near the back fence, cut the engine, and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. A soft photograph lay on the passenger seat, his late wife, Alicia, smiling in front of their old porch with their daughter, Jayla, barely a year old in her arms. He reached for it, ran his thumb over the crease across Alicia's face, and whispered, "Told you I wouldn't miss it." The air outside was thick with laughter and excitement. Balloons bounced in the hands of siblings. Proud grandparents found shade under umbrellas, and car windows blasted music that didn't quite drown out the sound of joy. Marcus stepped out, adjusted his dark blue Marine uniform, and closed the door behind him. His boots hit the pavement with a soft click, a rhythm of discipline he didn't even think about anymore. He didn't walk fast. Every step had purpose. People turned when he passed. Some smiled. Others glanced, looked twice, and then looked away. He wasn't surprised. He had grown used to that quiet mix of admiration and unease. A tall, disciplined black man in uniform had a way of making some people remember things they'd rather not confront. Inside the gymnasium, air conditioners struggled against the heat. The scent of floor polish mixed with popcorn and teenage nerves. Folding chairs filled the gym floor, while the bleachers overflowed with families clutching programs and flowers. The noise was constant, rustling, laughter, a few babies crying. A volunteer wearing a headset stopped Marcus near the door. "Ticket, sir?" Marcus handed it over. "Third row, left side. Family seating." The man glanced, nodded, and pointed him forward. "Right that way, congratulations." "Appreciate it," Marcus said, and moved through the rows. His posture was straight, his gaze forward. He found his seat and sat down quietly. 2 rows ahead, an older woman turned, noticed his uniform, and gave a small, kind smile. Marcus nodded back, grateful for the gesture. The gym lights shimmered off his medals, and the reflections danced faintly on the floor. He leaned forward slightly and looked toward the lineup of students waiting behind the stage curtain. Somewhere among them was Jayla, 18, full of drive, her mother's eyes, her own mind. He had missed birthdays, school plays, and first heartbreaks because of deployments. But he had promised her that for graduation, he'd be right there in the front row. Nothing would stop that. The band struck the first note of pomp and circumstance. The crowd rose to its feet. 1,000 flashes of phones lit the air. Marcus stood with everyone else, chest proud, hand at his side. When the national anthem began, the crowd placed hands over hearts. Marcus stayed still, his silence carrying the same weight as a salute. Then, as the music faded, movement caught his eye. 2 men in black security shirts started walking down the aisle side by side. They weren't police, just private guards hired for crowd control. Their radios crackled, their faces unreadable. They stopped at his row. The shorter one, a stocky man with a trimmed beard, leaned in slightly. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Marcus didn't move. "Excuse me?" "This section's reserved for immediate family," the taller one added, gum popping between words. "We've got other seating available in the back." Marcus blinked once, calm and steady. "I am family. That's my daughter walking today. 3rd row, left side. Ticketed and approved." He held out the folded paper. The guard didn't even look at it. "We've been told to clear this row." "By who?" Marcus asked evenly. The guards exchanged glances. "Sir, don't make this difficult. We're just following directions." Marcus sat perfectly still, the kind of stillness that spoke louder than any argument. "You're making a mistake." A few people nearby began to whisper. A woman 2 rows back pulled out her phone. The air shifted slightly, attention threading its way through the noise. The shorter guard crossed his arms. "Let's not cause a scene, all right? There's plenty of space in the back." Marcus looked straight ahead. "I've already got my seat." The guard's jaw tightened. "We can do this the easy way or we can call for help." Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. "Son, you don't want to go that route." That's when it happened. 7 men in different corners of the gym began to stand one after another. Not together, not in a rush. Slow, deliberate. Each had the unmistakable stillness of someone who'd seen the same kind of service. They didn't need uniforms to be recognized. It was in the way they stood, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, hands relaxed but ready. Marcus didn't look at them, but he knew. These were men he hadn't seen in years, brothers forged not by blood but by fire. And before anyone understood what was happening, the noise in the gym began to die. Parents stopped talking. A teacher froze mid-step. One of the guards turned, confused. The silence wasn't fear. It was respect, heavy, collective, undeniable. The taller guard frowned. "What's going on here?" The shortest of the 7 men finally spoke from across the aisle. "The question is, why are you bothering that man?" The voice was deep, calm, and commanding. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. He knew that voice. It belonged to Damon Cross, the Navy corpsman he once dragged out of an ambushed convoy outside of Helmand Province 12 years earlier. And Damon wasn't alone. The moment was shifting fast, and nobody knew where it would land. The shorter guard hesitated but didn't step back. His radio crackled on his belt and the static filled the quiet air. He glanced toward the taller guard who gave a subtle shrug, unsure of what to do next. Damon Cross took 2 slow steps forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "I asked you a question," he said again, his tone calm but cutting through the noise like a blade through fabric. "Why are you asking that man to leave?" The crowd's eyes moved back and forth between them. No one wanted to speak, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Something about this wasn't right. The taller guard finally answered, his voice tight. "Sir, we're just enforcing what we were told." "That section's full." Damon tilted his head slightly. "Funny. Looks like there's an empty seat right beside him." Several people looked down the row, confirming it. One open seat sat quietly next to Marcus, untouched. Marcus stayed motionless, staring straight ahead, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the stage. He had learned long ago that silence often says what words can't. The shorter guard shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, this isn't your concern." Damon didn't smile. "Oh, I assure you it is." Another man rose from the opposite bleachers, tall, dark-haired, his left wrist wrapped with a faded paracord band. His name was Raul Vega. He didn't say anything, he just stood, arms folded, watching. Then another stood near the back, broad-shouldered and calm. Then another by the entrance. Within seconds, all 7 were standing. The principal on stage paused her conversation, sensing the change in the air. Students lining the stage doors turned their heads to see what was happening. Marcus didn't turn to look. He knew exactly what they were doing. Damon's voice softened, but every word carried power. "I suggest you stop talking and walk away. You don't put hands on a man who earned that uniform." The guards froze. The crowd didn't breathe. The shorter one scowled. "You can't tell us how to do our job." "No," Damon said, taking one final step forward. "But I can tell you when you're about to lose control of it." For a few heartbeats, no one moved. Then, without warning, Marcus's memory pulled him backward, 15 years earlier, into the dust and chaos of another time. He was 28 then, crouched behind a burned-out Humvee in southern Afghanistan. His unit had been hit hard, an explosion tearing through the convoy, scattering sand and metal. Bullets sliced the air. He could hear the shouting of men, the desperate crackle of radios, the clatter of rounds against steel. Damon was lying 20 yards ahead, blood pooling under his leg, his rifle out of reach. 2 others were trapped behind an overturned truck calling for help. Marcus didn't think. He moved. He sprinted through open ground, grabbed Damon by the vest and pulled him into cover. Damon had yelled something. He couldn't remember what now, but Marcus had kept going, dragging another Marine behind him, ignoring the pain in his shoulder and the ringing in his ears. He remembered the heat, the dust, the smell of burning fuel, and then the silence that came afterward, the eerie quiet that always followed chaos. That was the day Damon had promised him one thing. "If you ever need me, anywhere, I'll be there." And now, 15 years later, he had kept that promise. The sound of shifting chairs snapped Marcus back to the present. The guards were still frozen in place, The crowd locked in that fragile stillness. One of the students on the stage whispered something, but it was swallowed by the tension hanging in the air. Marcus finally turned his head, his voice calm and steady. "You done?" The shorter guard blinked. "What?" "You done," Marcus repeated, his tone even. "Because I am." Damon didn't move, didn't blink. Neither did the others. The guards looked around and finally stepped back. The taller one muttered, "Fine, whatever." They turned and walked toward the back of the gym, shoulders stiff with embarrassment. The crowd exhaled as if everyone had been holding the same breath. Marcus looked straight ahead again. His face was calm, but his chest tightened with something heavy, something that wasn't pride or anger. But the quiet ache of knowing this wasn't the first time he had been told to move from a place he belonged. The ceremony continued, but the mood had shifted. Every clap, every cheer now carried a different weight. The gym wasn't just celebrating graduates anymore. It was watching a father who refused to be displaced. Back near the stage, Jayla waited in her line. She had seen everything. From the moment the guards approached her father, she couldn't take her eyes off them. Her heart pounded as she realized who those men were standing up for him. She didn't know them, but something deep inside told her. They knew her dad in ways she never could. When she was younger, Marcus never spoke much about his service. She had found a few old photos once tucked in a shoebox. Faces of men covered in dirt and sweat, smiling like they had survived something unspeakable. Now those same kinds of men were standing for him again. She looked toward him in the crowd, saw the calm in his expression, and felt something shift inside her. That wasn't just her father sitting there. That was a man who had carried his dignity through everything, and the world was finally seeing it too. But the day wasn't finished. There was still more to unfold, and the silence that had filled the gym was about to turn into something unforgettable. Jayla's name hadn't been called yet, but when it was, the whole room would rise again. Only this time it wouldn't be for ceremony. It would be for something far deeper. The principal tapped the microphone and cleared her throat, trying to bring the gym back to order. Her voice wavered slightly as she resumed announcing the graduates' names. One by one, the students crossed the stage, shaking hands, smiling for photos, and returning to their seats. But the applause had changed. It wasn't automatic anymore. It carried weight, steady, respectful, and aware. People kept glancing at Marcus's brow, as if drawn there by something they couldn't name. Marcus sat still, eyes fixed on the stage. Damon and the other men had returned to their seats too, but they didn't relax. They sat upright, watchful, their gazes flicking now and then toward the two guards by the back door, who were doing everything they could to look busy. Jayla waited behind the curtain, clutching the edge of her cap to keep her hands from shaking. She could still see her father through the gap in the curtain, the way he sat, quiet, composed, unbothered by what had just happened. That stillness was stronger than any outburst could have been. It steadied her breathing. The next few minutes blurred by. Names echoed, cheers rose, phones flashed. But Jayla's mind was far away, back in all the years her father had told her to stand, calling to pick your battles, to never let people decide your worth. She understood those lessons now in a way she never had before. When her name was finally called, the gym fell into a peculiar hush. "Jayla Lee," the principal said. There was a pause, brief but thick enough to feel, and then the sound came. It started as a slow, deliberate clap from somewhere near the middle rows. Damon Cross, then Raul Vega joined him, then the rest of the men one after another. Their rhythm was steady, in perfect unison. Each clap landed with weight echoing through the gym. The crowd followed, growing louder, rising to their feet. It wasn't the usual chaotic applause of a graduation. It was deeper, intentional. Marcus didn't move at first. His throat tightened. Then slowly he raised his hands and joined the clapping, his palms striking together in sync with the men who had once trusted him with their lives. Jayla walked across the stage, her steps sure and slow. The world around her blurred into color and sound, the gleam of the lights, the shimmer of gowns, the warmth of the applause wrapping around her. She looked out into the crowd, searching. And when she found him, her father, seated in that front row, back straight, eyes steady, everything else faded. He wasn't smiling big or waving. He didn't need to. The faint curve at the corner of his mouth said everything. Pride, love, peace. Jayla held her diploma in both hands, her chin high. For a moment, she wanted to run down and hug him. But she stayed in place, letting herself absorb what that moment meant. She had just walked for both of them. When the applause finally settled, the next names rolled on, but no one could shake what they'd just seen. Parents whispered quietly to each other. Students shifted in their seats, their eyes darting toward Marcus's row again and again. Something had changed in that room. Something invisible but lasting. An older man in the bleachers, a veteran himself, wiped his eyes with a napkin. A mother hugged her teenage son tighter. Even the guards at the back looked smaller somehow, as if realizing that what they had tried to enforce had turned into something far beyond their reach. The ceremony went on, but every name that followed carried an echo of that moment. Every cheer sounded just a little more sincere. When the final name was called, and caps flew into the air like bright bursts of freedom, the gym exploded in laughter and celebration. Marcus stood slowly, his knees stiff from sitting so long, and waited for the crowd to thin. Damon approached, his expression easy now, the tension gone from his shoulders. "You all right?" Damon asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "Always. You didn't have to sit through that mess alone, you know." "I wasn't alone," Marcus said, and the corner of his mouth lifted again. "Never was." Raoul came up behind Damon and chuckled. "You think we'd let some rent-a-cop tell you where to sit?" "Not a chance." Marcus gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "You boys never could mind your business." Damon grinned. "Guess that's why we're still breathing." They all stood there for a moment, the three of them as families filed out of the gym, hugging, shouting, taking photos. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Marcus's eyes found Jayla near the stage, surrounded by friends, her cap tilted, her smile wide. She was laughing, radiant, alive. For the first time in years, he felt a peace that reached all the way down to the bottom of his chest. Damon followed his gaze. "She's her mother's daughter," Marcus nodded, "and her father's strength." Outside, the late afternoon light poured over the parking lot, the air buzzing with voices and the smell of barbecue smoke drifting from food trucks parked near the curb. Jayla spotted him through the crowd and came running. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She just threw her arms around his shoulders, holding on tight. He hugged her back, one arm around her waist, the other around her shoulders, pulling her close like he used to when she was a little girl. "I saw everything," she whispered. "They tried to move you." "I know," he said softly. "I wanted to say something. I was shaking, Dad. I wanted to walk off that stage." He leaned back enough to look her in the eyes. "You did the right thing." "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice cracking. "You did everything," he replied. "You stood your ground without losing yourself. You finished what you started. That's what strength looks like." She blinked away tears and nodded. "Who were those men?" He turned slightly. The 7 of them stood near the gym doors, hands in pockets, chatting quietly, occasionally glancing his way. "Brothers," Marcus said, "not by blood, by choice, by what we've lived through." Jayla followed his gaze. "They all came here for you?" "They came because they knew I might need them," he said. "That's what real loyalty is. You don't have to ask for it, it just shows up." They stood there in silence for a moment, the sound of laughter and car engines filling the background. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out the old photograph, creased and faded, the one of Alicia holding Jayla as a baby. "She'd be proud of you," he said quietly. Jayla's eyes softened. "You think so?" "I know so," he said. "She'd have cried through the whole thing." Jayla smiled through the tears. "You too?" He chuckled. "Maybe just a little." They stood side by side, watching the last of the graduates drive off, the parking lot emptying until only a few families remained. Damon raised a hand from across the way, a simple nod of respect. Marcus returned it. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky orange and gold. Jayla looked up at her father and asked, "You ever gonna tell me what happened back then? The things you never talked about?" Marcus took a long breath and smiled faintly. "Some stories aren't about what happened out there. They're about what you carry home." Jayla nodded slowly. "And what you let go of." He looked at her, proud. "Exactly." They started walking toward the Tahoe. Behind them, the 7 men were leaving too, each heading in a different direction, quiet and composed. The bond between them didn't need words. When they reached the car, Jayla stopped and looked back at the gym. "That's a day nobody's gonna forget." Marcus opened the door, paused, and said, "Good. Some lessons are meant to echo." Then they got in, and the engine rumbled to life. As they pulled out of the lot, the music of celebration faded behind them. The road stretched ahead, long and quiet. Jayla leaned her head against the window. "You hungry?" Marcus smiled. "Starving." "You pick, Waffle House," she said instantly. He laughed. Of course, they drove on into the sunset. Two silhouettes against the fading light. A father and a daughter, bound by everything that silence had taught them. And that day, in a small Texas town, an entire gym learned what strength really sounds like when it doesn't make a sound. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, the white lines flickering beneath the Tahoe's headlights as dusk settled into night. The air hummed with quiet between them. Neither spoke for a long while. The tension of the day had dissolved into something calmer, something sacred. Jayla broke the silence first. "You know, when those guards came up to you, I thought you were going to lose it. I've never seen you sit that still before." Marcus chuckled softly. "I wasn't still, sweetheart. I was holding back a storm." She glanced at him, curious. "You didn't look angry." "That's because I wasn't," he said. "Anger's easy. Control's the real work. You can't build anything from anger, only destroy it." Jayla let the words sink in. The road glowed faintly under the streetlights, the hum of the tires filling the quiet. "So that's what Mom used to mean when she said you save your words for when they matter." He smiled. "She said that about me?" "All the time," Jayla said. "She'd tell me, 'Your dad doesn't need to yell to be heard. He walks in a room and it listens.'" Marcus's grip tightened on the wheel. The ache of memory was there, sharp and soft at once. "She was smarter than both of us put together," he murmured. Jayla looked down at her diploma resting on her lap. "You think those men, the ones who stood up for you, they were all people you served with?" Marcus nodded. "Different years, different units. Some I hadn't seen since the desert. We went through hell together." "You don't forget a man who pulled you out of it. What's it like?" she asked quietly. "Carrying all that around, the things you've seen?" He paused, then said, "It's heavy. Some days it feels like sand in your boots. You shake it out, but there's always some left. But that weight reminds you who you are. It reminds you what's worth protecting." She nodded slowly. "You think they felt the same way today? About standing up for you?" He smiled faintly. "They weren't standing for me. They were standing for what's right. For all the times we couldn't speak. For all the rooms we walked into where we were expected to shrink. Today wasn't just about a seat, Jayla. It was about saying without words, 'We still belong.'" Jayla turned to the window, watching the last colors of daylight fade into the horizon. The thought of that gym, of 7 strangers rising as one, made her chest tighten. "You know," she said softly, "when I was on stage, I couldn't hear anything but them clapping. It felt like the whole room froze. Like time stopped for a second." "It did," Marcus said. "That's what respect sounds like when it finally shows up." They drove on in silence for a few minutes more. A neon sign appeared ahead, its light flickering against the windshield. "Waffle House." Marcus pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine. The smell of fried batter and coffee drifted through the night air. Jayla grinned. "You sure you're up for this? You look like you could sleep for 2 days." He smiled. "Maybe after some hash browns." Inside, the diner buzzed with the low hum of conversation. A few truckers sat hunched over coffee mugs. A waitress in her 60s moved between tables, refilling cups with a smile that looked permanent. They slid into a booth near the window. Jayla rested her diploma on the seat beside her and picked up the menu, though she already knew what she wanted. The waitress came over, pen poised. "What'll it be?" Jayla looked at her dad and said, "He'll take the All-Star, double bacon, and I'll have waffles with strawberries." The waitress smiled. "Sounds like a celebration." Jayla nodded. "It is." When she walked away, Marcus leaned back in the booth and exhaled. The fluorescent light above them flickered softly, and for a moment he felt the fatigue of years settle into his bones. "Dad," Jayla said after a pause, "when you were over there, did you ever think about quitting?" He shook his head. "Not once. I thought about surviving, though, and about getting everyone else home. That's what leadership is, making sure the people beside you make it back." Jayla looked at him, eyes wide. "And they did?" "Most of them," he said quietly. "Some didn't. Those are the ones who stay with you the longest." Jayla's voice softened. "Is that why you still wear the uniform?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Not for the medals, not for the salute, for them. For the promise." "The promise?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. That when one of us falls, the rest of us stand taller. That's what you saw today. Damon, Raoul, all of them, they weren't standing for me. They were standing for the promise. Jayla leaned forward, her voice a whisper. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. Their food arrived, steaming and bright. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that says more than conversation ever could. As they finished, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket again and pulled out the worn photograph. He placed it on the table between them. Jayla smiled softly. You still carry it? Everywhere I go, he said. It's my compass. She studied the picture. Her mother's laugh, her own tiny face. You think she saw us today? Marcus's voice was low but certain. She never stopped watching. They sat there until the plates were empty, the coffee refilled twice, and the hum of the diner settled into the background like an old song. When they stepped back into the cool night air, the stars were beginning to show. Marcus looked up at the sky, then back at Jayla. You know what your mom used to say? Jayla shook her head. She said, strength doesn't shout. It stands quietly, waiting for the world to notice. Jayla smiled. She must have learned that from you. He laughed softly. No, she lived it better than I ever could. They walked back to the Tahoe, the sound of crickets rising from the fields beyond the road. As they climbed in, Marcus turned to her one last time. You did good today, Jay. So did you, she said. You showed everyone what real strength looks like. He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life and they drove off again. Father and daughter. Two pieces of the same story, heading home through the quiet dark. The road stretched endlessly, but for once it didn't feel long. It felt earned, and somewhere deep inside that silence, both of them knew that day would live in more than memory. It would live as proof. That dignity speaks louder than any voice ever could. They drove until the highway turned into smaller roads lined with sleeping houses and the hum of cicadas filled the air. Jayla's head rested against the window, her eyes half closed. Marcus glanced over and smiled. You still awake? She nodded, though her voice was barely a whisper. Just thinking. About what? About how everything can change in one day. This morning I was worried about tripping on stage. Then I saw the way everyone looked at you. I've never felt more proud and more angry at the same time. Marcus nodded slowly. That's the world in one sentence, baby girl. It'll make you proud and angry in the same breath. What matters is what you do with both. Jayla smiled faintly. You always sound like a book. Maybe, he said, but you're the one writing the next chapter. They passed a field where the dark grass shimmered with fireflies. Marcus slowed the car, the lights washing over the old wooden sign that read Lee County Veterans Memorial Park. He pulled in without saying a word. Jayla looked around, confused. Why are we stopping? He turned off the engine. There's something I want to show you. They stepped out into the warm night air. The park was quiet, empty except for the whisper of wind through the flagpoles. At the center stood a tall marble monument engraved with names, some weathered, some new. Marcus ran his fingers over one near the bottom. Damon made me promise I'd come here one day, he said softly. Told me his cousin's name was here. Took him years to come home. Jayla stepped closer. The moonlight fell across her father's face, and she saw something new there, peace, but also the weight of memories too old to name. I never understood how you could carry so much and never talk about it, she said. But now I think I do. You don't need to tell the story. You are the story, he smiled gently. You're starting to sound like your mother. Jayla placed a hand on his arm. She'd be proud of you for today. Marcus stared at the stone wall, the names stretching in neat rows. You know what's funny? I think she'd be proud of them too. The ones who stood. The ones who didn't even have to think about it. They didn't even know if you'd recognize them, Jayla said. I didn't have to. Real loyalty doesn't need an introduction. They stood there for a while, listening to the soft flap of the flags. The world beyond the park felt far away. The gym, the guards, the crowd, all of it faded until there was just the two of them and the quiet. Marcus finally said, When I was overseas, we used to joke that silence was the loudest thing you could hear. Now I get it. Sometimes silence isn't emptiness. It's understanding. Jayla looked up at the flag rippling above them. That's what happened in the gym, wasn't it? Everyone understood, even the ones who didn't know why. He nodded. Respect doesn't always start with agreement. Sometimes it starts with realization. They turned back toward the car, walking side by side through the dim parking lot. The gravel crunched softly beneath their shoes. When they got in, Marcus reached for the ignition, then paused. "Jayla," he said quietly, "and promise me something. Anything. Don't ever let anyone decide how small or big you should stand. Not because of your name or your color, or what people think they see. You stand because you know who you are." Jayla's eyes glistened. "I promise," he smiled. "Good. That's the only promise that ever really matters." As they pulled back onto the road, the stars began to thicken above them. The lights of the small town faded in the rearview mirror, and the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore, it was full. Somewhere out there, Damon and the others were driving home too, maybe replaying the day in their minds. Maybe smiling at how quickly a simple ceremony had turned into something unforgettable. And back in that gym, people would still be talking. They'd say, "Did you see those men stand up?" They'd whisper, "Who was that Marine?" And even if they never learned his name, they'd remember the feeling. Jayla reached for the photo resting on the dashboard, the one of her mother holding her as a baby. She looked at it for a long moment, then placed it gently in the middle of the console. "Mom would have said you were showing off," she teased softly. Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "She'd say I was just being stubborn." She'd be right. The laughter faded into easy silence again. The road rolled on ahead, stretching through the dark, guiding them home. As the first hint of dawn began to color the horizon, Jayla leaned her head back and whispered, "Dad? Yeah? I think I understand now." He glanced at her. "Understand what?" "What you mean when you say strength isn't about how loud you are. It's about how steady you stay when the world starts shaking." Marcus smiled, his eyes soft. "Then I guess I did my job." The sky ahead turned gold as the sun began to rise. Marcus reached over, squeezed her hand once, and didn't let go. Behind them lay a gym full of witnesses, a day filled with silence that spoke louder than shouts. Ahead of them stretched a life built on everything that moment had meant: dignity, courage, and a quiet kind of strength that would never fade. And long after the town forgot the names or the headlines, the story of that day would live on, not in news feeds or posts, but in the way people chose to stand, and in the way a father and daughter learned that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that never needs to raise itself at all.